Imagine for a second, you're running a tech startup.
Okay.
And in the early days, you've got, say, 10 engineers. They're writing code. They're building the product, generating revenue.
Right, the classic growth phase.
Exactly. The company's growing. But over the years, the original founders start retiring. They step back, but they still draw this, this hefty pension from the company's profits.
It's just pretty standard, yeah.
Sure, sure. But now, fast forward a few decades, you look at your payroll and you realize you suddenly have more retired founders drawing pensions than you have active engineers actually writing code.
Oh, man, the math on that gets terrifying very quickly. I mean, you can't just ask the remaining engineers to work 24 hours a day to cover the deficit.
Right, exactly. The whole system is just fundamentally unbalanced at that point. Now, I want you to imagine that startup isn't a company. Imagine it's an entire country.
Yeah, that's where the stakes get incredibly high.
They really do. Today, we are looking at this comprehensive data dossier on Hungary. It's basically a nation pulling off this incredible high-wire act to get richer, greener, and smarter, all while its actual population is, well, shrinking.
It's a massive challenge.
It is. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us.
It really is a fascinating case study because, it challenges the fundamental assumption most of us have about economics.
Which is what exactly?
That success requires constant physical expansion, like more people, more factories, more consumption.
Right, the traditional blueprint for growth.
Exactly. But what happens when you physically run out of people to fuel that expansion?
Well, to understand how a country survives when that blueprint just gets entirely ripped up, we are looking at a very specific, incredibly detailed source today.
And it is dense.
Very dense.
That's
I've actually got the physical report sitting here right on the desk, and I just want to set the scene for you. It's this beautifully clean academic document.
Very minimalist.
Yeah, a minimalist white background, and there's this subtle light gray outline of Hungary right in the center. And the charts inside, they don't use those, aggressive neon colors you see on cable news.
Oh, no flashing red and bright yellow.
Right, they use these very elegant, understated Morandi tones and deep blues. Honestly, it looks like the kind of multi-dimensional macro data assessment that gets slid across a mahogany table to a head of state.
It certainly reads like one, too. I mean, the data spans this incredible timeline from 1960 all the way to 2024.
That's over 6 decades.
Yeah, more than 6 decades, capturing a country undergoing multiple really profound identity shifts. We're looking at a transition from a centrally planned Soviet-era system through the friction of the 1990s right up into the hyper-connected digital economy we have today.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into the actual story of this transformation, we need to establish where this data is actually coming from.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, because if we're going to diagnose the health of an entire nation, we need reliable lab results.
Looking at the methodology overview on page 2, this isn't based on, opinion polling or isolated think tank estimates, right?
No, absolutely not. The robustness of this data is what makes the analysis so compelling. It aggregates core indicators from the absolute heavyweights of global data tracking.
Like who?
We're talking about the World Bank, the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the International Labor Organization.
Oh, wow. So the big players.
The biggest. And they're combining those international standardized models with localized granular data pulled directly from the Hungarian Central Statistical Office.
Got it. And the report breaks this mountain of data down into 5 main pillars, right? Macroeconomic indicators, population dynamics, human capital, governance quality, and environmental sustainability.
That's correct.
But there's this specific metric they use to calculate this sort of bottom line of country that I think is just brilliant. They lean really heavily on a concept called adjusted net savings. Yes, and that is a crucial distinction to make right at the top of our discussion.
Right, because usually we just use GDP.
Exactly. Most of the time when we talk about a country doing well, we just cite GDP gross domestic product. But GDP is essentially just a measure of velocity.
Velocity?
Yeah, like how fast is money changing hands? How much stuff did we produce this year?
Okay, so it's like looking at your gross paycheck.
Perfect analogy.
Like, it looks like a big number, but it doesn't tell you if you're actually building wealth. So if GDP is your gross paycheck, then adjusted net savings is looking at what's actually left in your bank account after you pay for the wear and tear on your car, your mounting health bills, and the roof repairs on your home.
That gets right to the heart of it. GDP doesn't care if you're getting rich by burning your own house down and selling the firewood.
Wow, that's a bleak image, but yeah, it makes sense.
It's true. Adjusted net savings penalizes a country for depleting its natural resources, for emitting carbon dioxide, and for the particulate matter pollution that, actively damages its citizens' lungs.
So it subtracts the bad stuff.
Exactly. And on the flip side, it actually credits a country for investing in education, treating human capital as a genuine asset rather than just a sunk expense. It evaluates sustainable national wealth.
And that is exactly why you, the person listening to this right now, should care deeply about this topic.
Absolutely.
Whether you're an economics student trying to understand European transitions, a business leader evaluating global supply chains, or just a curious mind trying to figure out where the world is heading, Hungary serves as the ultimate real-world laboratory.
Because we are watching a nation attempt to transition in real time.
Right, from an efficiency-driven economy, where you win by just making things cheaper and faster, to an innovation-driven economy.
And it's really not guaranteed to succeed. The data we're about to explore shows a country wrestling with incredible triumphs and existential pressures simultaneously.
Yeah, so let's start with the macro picture. On page 3, there's this composite line chart tracking the adjusted net national income against the GDP growth rate.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now.
And the first thing that jumps out is just the sheer accumulation of wealth. There's this massive green arrow pointing upwards. We are looking at an adjusted net national income that essentially doubled.
Doubled.
Yeah, going from roughly $60.77 billion to over $111 billion. And this is measured in 2015 constant dollars.
Which means they've stripped out the illusion of inflation.
Exactly.
The purchasing power actually doubled. The pie genuinely got twice as big.
But the chart also shows it hasn't been a smooth ride up an escalator, right? There are these stark red circles drawn on the chart highlighting zones of negative growth.
Right, the external shocks.
Yeah, you've got a massive hit around the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis and another sharp contraction during the 2020 pandemic.
Yeah.
And recently, the GDP growth seems to be hovering in this somewhat cautious band, somewhere between 0.5% and 4%.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a country that is getting richer but is highly sensitive to the outside world. What's fascinating here is how this single chart illustrates the fundamental paradox of the modern, globally integrated economy. On a long enough timeline, you see undeniable long-term expansion.
Right. The standard of living is massively higher today than it was 30 years ago.
But that growth comes with extreme vulnerability to external shocks. Hungary is deeply fundamentally integrated into the global supply chain, particularly the European manufacturing network.
So they don't have the luxury of insulation. Like, they can't just hide.
No, not at all. When the global economy is booming, they catch the wind. But if the rest of the world sneezes...
Hungary catches a cold.
Exactly. The 2008 financial crisis hit them incredibly hard because foreign capital dried up almost overnight. And then the 2020 pandemic disrupted the physical supply chains that their factories completely rely on.
So when you hover in that low to mid single-digit growth band, you're essentially in a state of ongoing recovery and cautious stabilization.
Yes.
Okay, so the wealth is growing despite those external shocks. But wealth doesn't just, spontaneously generate out of thin air. People have to build it.
Right, the labor force.
Let's look at the actual engine of this economy, the population dynamics on page 4. And honestly, this is where the math starts to look incredibly daunting.
Because the engine is shrinking.
It is. There's a dual axis chart here that tracks the total population trend. And there's this red downward arrow. The growth rate has been locked in the negative for a very long time.
Yeah, it hovers between negative 0.5% and negative 0.1%.
Meaning the absolute number of people living in the country is contracting year over year. But it's the second axis that really highlights the tension. It tracks the old age dependency ratio.
And that line is climbing relentlessly.
It has a huge red upward arrow next to it. It's gone from 13.76% to over 19.36% of the working age population.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we're looking at the mathematical reality of deep aging.
Deep aging.
Yes. The old age dependency ratio measures the ratio of people over the age of 65 compared to the number of people of traditional working age, roughly 15 to 64.
Okay.
When that number approaches 20%, it means the financial and social burden on every single active worker is getting heavier by the day.
Right. Going back to our startup analogy, Those active workers are the engineers. They're the tax base. They're the ones funding the healthcare system, the public infrastructure, the national defense, and, well, the pensions of the retirees.
Precisely. And when you physically have fewer hands to do the work, you simply cannot rely on raw manpower to grow your economy anymore.
The old model is broken.
Completely. The efficiency-driven model, where you just open more factories and hire more cheap labor, is dead. The demographic math makes it impossible.
I feel like the obvious question someone might ask here is, why not just fix the math with massive immigration? Just import more workers to balance the ratio.
It's a logical question, but it ignores the political and cultural realities of many Central and Eastern European nations. Hungary's policy approach has historically prioritized internal structural adaptation over large-scale immigration to solve demographic shortfalls.
Gotcha. They're trying to solve a 21st century demographic crisis largely with the population they already have.
Which means if you have fewer hands, you need to completely change what those hands are doing. You have to move them up the value chain.
Which brings us perfectly to page 5, the data on how people actually make a living. There is a stacked area chart here breaking down employment sectors, and the shift is dramatic.
It really is night and day.
In the 1990s, the service sector accounted for about 52.7% of jobs. Today, it's over 64.9%. Now, industry, the manufacturing base, the factories, that has remained surprisingly stable at around 30%.
The bedrock of the economy.
Right. But agriculture and manual, vulnerable employment have plummeted. The service sector has just completely taken over as the core engine.
This is a classic hallmark of economic modernization, but in this case, it was accelerated by demographic necessity. As an economy shifts from heavy industry and agriculture toward services, finance, IT, healthcare, education, complex logistics, it fundamentally changes the nature of work.
From muscle to mind.
Exactly. It moves from physical, muscle-intensive labor to cognitive, knowledge-intensive labor.
There is a specific data point tied to that shift that I think is, well, it's just the most important cultural metric in the entire report. I'm looking at a pointer on the chart emphasizing that the service sector has become the ultimate engine for female employment.
Yes, that's a massive shift.
Women now comprise over 70% of the service sector workforce.
This is where economics and sociology intersect beautifully. When your overall population is shrinking, you just cannot afford to leave half of your potential cognitive talent on the sidelines.
You need everybody playing.
You do. The transition to a service economy naturally opens up massive avenues for female labor force participation.
Right. If you are losing workers overall, you need every single person participating at their highest possible capacity. But to participate in a high-level service economy, you need education.
Yeah.
You can't just, walk off a farm and start managing complex logistics software.
Which is why the report heavily emphasizes the Human Capital Index, or HCI, on page 6.
The data shows their HCI hovering around 0.68 to 0.70. Can you explain what that actually measures? It sounds a bit abstract.
Sure. The Human Capital Index is a brilliant metric developed by the World Bank. It measures the amount of human capital that a child born today can expect to attain by age 18, given the risks of poor health and poor education that prevail in the country where they live.
Okay, so a score of 0.70 means what exactly?
It means a child born in Hungary today will be 70% as productive when they grow up as they could be if they enjoyed complete education and full health. For context, 0.70 places them quite high globally, firmly in the tier of advanced economies.
That makes sense. And within that education data, there's a statistic that directly ties back to the female employment boom we just talked about.
The higher education attainment.
Yeah. When you look at higher education, there's a red circle around this specific trend. Women are rapidly, undeniably overtaking men. It notes that 12.7% of women over the age of 25 hold a master's degree or higher.
And that's catching up to, and in many recent cohorts, surpassing the male percentage.
Yeah, the report notes men at 13.4% historically, but it points out this rapid catch-up and overtaking trend by women in recent years. The educational attainment gap hasn't just closed. In the highest tiers of knowledge work, women are becoming the dominant force.
It completely aligns with the structural shift we discussed. To survive the shrinking population, the workforce had to become highly educated. The data shows that the population, particularly the female population, rose to that challenge.
They acquired the degrees necessary to operate a modern, service-oriented economy.
Precisely. Also, the report notes that primary and lower secondary completion rates are rock solid, stable at over 90%. The foundation is there.
But here's the reality check, right? All those master's degrees and IT skills don't mean anything if the workforce isn't physically capable of working.
A very grim truth.
Right. A highly educated workforce only matters if they are healthy. And the public health data on page 7 tells a fascinating story of triumph and subsequent pressure. Let's talk about the triumph first, the infant mortality rate.
It is one of the most remarkable charts in the entire data set.
It really is. In 1960, the infant mortality rate was roughly 48 deaths per 1,000 live births. Today, it is under 3.3. There's a marker here showing this cliff drop in the 1990s. The line just plummets off a cliff.
It is the ultimate testament to the modernization of their foundational public health infrastructure. Going from 48 to under 3.3 is the difference between a developing nation and a fully modernized, high-income nation.
Thousands of lives saved every single year.
Absolutely. It requires a total overhaul of sanitation, maternal care, hospital protocols, and pediatric nutrition. And consequently, life expectancy has soared.
Yeah, looking at the life expectancy data here, women are consistently outliving men. Women are reaching roughly 80 years of age compared to 73 years for men.
That 7-year gap is significant, and it's a common feature in many post-industrial nations. It's often tied to legacy occupational hazards and heavy industry, lifestyle factors, and differing healthcare utilization rates between genders.
Men just not going to the doctor as much.
Basically, yeah. But while the extension of life is an absolute triumph, it introduces the specific pressure that defines modern healthcare systems.
The pressure of an aging population staying alive longer.
Exactly. It's the transition from acute care to chronic care. When you eliminate early childhood mortality and people routinely live into their late 70s and 80s, the healthcare system's primary enemy changes.
You aren't fighting, like, the flu or infections as much.
Right. You are fighting non-communicable diseases, NCDs, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, chronic respiratory issues.
So, going back to our startup analogy again, you don't just have more retired founders. You have retired founders who require increasingly complex, ongoing, and expensive medical maintenance to stay healthy.
And treating a chronic NCD over a 20-year period is vastly more resource-intensive than treating a broken arm or a childhood infection.
I can imagine.
So this highly educated, service-oriented workforce is carrying a dual burden. They're supporting the pensions of an aging population, and they are funding a healthcare system that must manage complex chronic diseases for decades per patient.
Wow. Think about the implications of this. I mean, to you listening, the shift from manual labor to highly educated, service-based roles is happening everywhere. We see it all over the world. But what this data shows is that in Hungary, it wasn't just a natural evolution of capitalism. It was a demographic mechanism for survival.
They had to get smarter because they were getting smaller.
And smaller, smarter workforces require a completely different kind of infrastructure to maximize their output.
They need tools that multiply their effort.
Okay, let's unpack this. Here's where it gets really interesting. You have this incredibly educated, female-led service workforce, but there are physically fewer of them every year. They can't just work longer hours to make up the difference. So how is the state solving the sheer lack of manpower?
They are building them digital exoskeletons.
I love that. Digital leverage. Let's look at page 10. The digital infrastructure data here looks like a hockey stick. Internet usage went from near zero in the 1990s to over 91.7% today.
A total saturation of connectivity.
But the statistic that really matters isn't just people having Wi-Fi in their homes to watch movies. It's the secure internet servers.
Ah, yes.
They skyrocketed from 167 per million people to over 55,000 per million people. There's a lightning bolt icon on the chart emphasizing this exponential leap between 2010 and 2020.
That distinction is critical. Internet usage tells us that people can stream video and read the news, but the explosion of secure internet servers, that is the backbone of a modern digital economy.
What does a secure server actually do in this context? Like, why is that the metric the World Bank tracks?
Because secure servers enable encrypted banking, e-commerce, secure logistics tracking, telehealth, and corporate cloud computing. This isn't just connectivity, it's commercial capability.
It's how you actually do business safely.
Right. It is the digital nervous system that allows a shrinking physical population to punch massively above its weight globally. A single logistics manager in Budapest with a secure server network can track and deploy supply chain software that services 1 million clients across Europe.
That is how you generate leverage.
You replace physical manpower with digital processing power.
So the digital infrastructure is there, they have the leverage, but what are they actually building with it? This leads us to page 14, the innovation and intellectual property data. And the inputs look incredibly strong.
Very robust investment.
Research and development spending grew from 0.6% of GDP to roughly 1.6%. And the human capital is backing it up. The number of researchers jumped from 1,000 to nearly 4,700 per million people. They're throwing real money and serious brain power at the problem.
They are. The inputs, the funding, and the personnel are scaling up beautifully. But the report highlights a very stubborn hurdle. While the inputs are up, the outputs are stagnant, specifically the number of resident patent applications.
Yeah, I see that here. Despite almost quintupling the number of researchers, patent applications have just fluctuated in this flat band, usually between 400 and 800 a year.
They aren't breaking out.
No, they're not. Why is there a disconnect? I mean, if I hire almost 5 times as many researchers, shouldn't I get 5 times as many patents?
Not necessarily. It's the difference between applied research and fundamental innovation. It is relatively easy for a country to attract R&D money to optimize existing processes,
Like what?
like making a German car engine 2% more efficient or improving a software deployment pipeline for a multinational firm. That counts as R&D spending, and it employs researchers, but it rarely results in a groundbreaking, novel patent owned by a domestic company.
Oh, I get it. It's the difference between being a really technically proficient cover band and actually writing your own original hit songs.
That is exactly the tension. And it defines the national goal right now. For decades, the value proposition was made in Hungary. We have a skilled, affordable workforce. Bring your factories here. We will manufacture it efficiently.
And now,
Now, the paradigm shift they desperately need to make is moving to invented in Hungary. They need to own the intellectual property, not just assemble the parts, because owning the IP is where the exponential wealth is generated in the 21st century.
okay, so they are trying to innovate, they've digitized their workforce, they are highly educated, but who are they actually selling all this to? Let's look at their role as a global connector on page 9.
The trade data.
The export data is absolutely staggering. Export total value grew from $9.7 billion in the 1990s to nearly $170 billion.
If
And there is a note here that at one point, goods trade accounted for over 150% of the entire GDP.
Yes.
Wait, how is that mathematically possible? How do you trade more than your entire economy actually produces? Are they just acting as a pass-through state, like a giant toll booth for European goods?
Yeah. It sounds impossible until you understand the mechanics of global value chains. The 150% figure is the classic hallmark of an export-oriented economy that acts as a highly integrated processing hub.
Walk me through how that physically works.
Imagine a Hungarian factory imports a car chassis and a transmission from Germany for $10,000. They install the electronics, add the interior, and drop in the engine, adding $2,000 of value through their labor and engineering. Then they export the finished car to France for $12,000.
Okay, I follow.
The total trade volume recorded on the ledger is $22,000. The $10,000 import plus the $12,000 export. But the actual GDP contribution, the value added inside the borders of Hungary, is only that $2,000.
So the trade number inflates massively because the expensive components are constantly crossing the border in different stages of completion.
Exactly. They are a vital, highly integrated node in the European and global manufacturing network. And what's crucial is the composition of those exports.
There's a little ship icon here pointing out high-tech products.
Yes, the report notes the absolute dominance of high-tech products in their export portfolio. They aren't just exporting raw materials, they are processing and exporting complex machinery, electronics, and pharmaceuticals.
But this raises a huge flashing red warning sign for me. If they are manufacturing and exporting $170 billion worth of complex high-tech goods, isn't their environment just paying the ultimate price?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, when you hear about that level of industrial output, you picture smokestacks, toxic rivers, and unbreathable air. Historically, that was the tragic trade-off of industrialization. You get rich, but you destroy your habitat.
And for a long time, under the mid-century models, that was absolutely true. But here is where we see one of the most optimistic data points in the entire report. Page 11 introduces the phenomenon of decoupling.
Decoupling, that sounds like a buzzword. What does it actually mean on the ground?
Decoupling occurs when an economy manages to continue growing its GDP while simultaneously reducing its environmental impact. Historically, the two trend lines were locked together. More economic growth meant more carbon emissions.
They moved in tandem.
Exactly. But in this data, we see those lines finally decouple and go in opposite directions. While the GDP and adjusted net national income skyrocketed, the total CO2 emissions, excluding land use changes, actually dropped from a peak of 93.7 megatons down to roughly 62.7 megatons.
That is a massive drop. There's a little green leaf icon here marking that divergence. How do you actually achieve that? Is it just a matter of shutting down old, dirty Soviet-era coal plants?
That is a large part of the initial drop, yes. Transitioning away from the heaviest, most inefficient, polluting legacy industries. But it's also the result of a proactive green pivot over the last 2 decades. The data shows renewable energy, specifically non-hydro renewables like solar and wind, growing from a negligible 0.1% to over 15% of the energy mix.
So they're powering this new high-tech manufacturing base with an increasingly cleaner energy grid.
Exactly. They're growing smarter, not dirtier.
And it's not just carbon in the atmosphere. It's the air people are breathing on the street. Looking at page 12, the air quality metric here, the PM 2.5 exposure dropped from 25.2 micrograms per cubic meter down to about 14.1.
Though there's a checkmark noting they still need to get closer to strict WHO standards, it's a huge improvement.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, wait, remember what we discussed earlier about the aging population and the massive burden of chronic healthcare costs?
Right, the retired founders needing ongoing medical care.
Yeah. PM 2.5 refers to fine particulate matter. This is the invisible pollution from exhaust fumes and coal dust that gets deep into your lungs and enters your bloodstream.
It is a massive documented driver of heart disease, asthma, and strokes.
So by dropping that exposure rate so significantly, they aren't just making the sky look prettier, they are directly lowering public health expenditures.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
all connected.
Environmental policy is economic policy. By cleaning the air, the report notes they're reducing the damage costs of particulate emissions as a percentage of GNI. They are preventing thousands of chronic illnesses that the state would otherwise have to pay to treat over the next 20 years.
The lungs of the worker literally dictate the budget of the state.
Exactly. And speaking of the physical environment, I was looking at the agricultural data on page 13. It's another fascinating example of doing more with less.
How so?
Well, the arable land per capita is shrinking. It went from roughly 0.51 hectares down to 0.45, so they have less farmland per person. But grain yields have steadily risen.
Better tractors, better fertilizer, precision agriculture.
Exactly. And because they're farming more efficiently, they actually have land to spare. The forest cover in the country is up. It grew from 20.1% to over 22.5%. There's a little pine tree icon here crediting proactive policies aimed at returning marginal farmland back to forest.
It is a remarkable synthesis. They are producing more food on less land, making room for carbon-absorbing forests, all while expanding high-tech exports and lowering air pollution.
Okay, I have to pause here, because if I just listen to everything we've talked about for the last 45 minutes, we have a doubling of national wealth, an economy that's successfully shifted to services, a highly educated female workforce, plunging infant mortality, exponential digital growth, massive export dominance, and environmental decoupling where emissions are actually falling.
It's quite a list.
It sounds like an absolute utopia. It sounds like they solved the game of civilization.
Right.
But there has to be a catch. None of this functions in a vacuum. What happens when we look at how the system is actually governed?
That brings us to page 8, the institutional pillar, governance under pressure. And you are right to ask for the catch, because the data here reveals the central vulnerability of this entire economic model.
Let me set the stage for our listeners. I'm looking at the data, which relies on the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or the WGI. And I want to be incredibly clear here. As your host, I am not injecting any political opinion or ethical judgment into
You're
this.
just looking at the numbers.
Exactly. I am simply reading the globe's data points exactly as they are presented in this academic report. The WGI aggregates hundreds of variables from international organizations to rank countries on a percentile basis globally. And the radar charts here, they're showing some severe headwinds.
Let's look at the specific percentile shifts. What is the data showing?
Okay, first, there's the metric for control of corruption. At its historical high, roughly 20 years ago, Hungary was ranked quite well globally, around the 71st percentile, but it has slid down to roughly the 60th percentile. There's a red warning symbol next to that. That's a noticeable, sustained drop.
And the other indicators.
Then we look at voice and accountability, which measures citizens' participation, freedom of expression, and media. That metric also showed a distinct decline, currently sitting at around the 59th percentile. Finally, regulatory quality, which measures the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies that promote private sector development. That one hasn't dropped as sharply, but it remains fluctuating in a band between the 62nd and 75th percentiles. It's volatile.
This raises an important question. Why does this specific set of metrics matter so much for the economic model Hungary has built? It's not just a matter of abstract political theory, it is a matter of hard, cold economic survival.
Break that down for me. Why does a slide to the 60th percentile in corruption control threaten the economy? Isn't the factory still going to build the car regardless of the political climate?
Think back to the hyperglobalization and the trade data we just discussed. Hungary is an export-driven economy that relies extraordinarily heavily on foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Right, the German automakers and tech firms.
Exactly. German automakers, Asian electric vehicle, battery manufacturers, global tech firms, they are the ones bringing the capital, building the physical factories, and installing the servers in Hungary. In a highly competitive global market, institutional trust is the ultimate currency.
Meaning, a multinational company needs to know the rules of the game aren't going to change halfway through the match.
Precisely. If a global corporation is going to invest $2 billion in a new electric vehicle battery plant outside of Budapest, they are making a 20-year commitment. They need absolute regulatory certainty.
They need a safe bet.
They need to know that contracts will be enforced fairly, that the judicial system is impartial, and that corruption won't siphon off their margins or disrupt their supply chains. A fluctuating governance environment over the last 2 decades presents a severe challenge to that trust.
And if they lose that trust, those foreign companies don't just complain, they pack up and move.
Capital is highly mobile. If multinational firms sense regulatory instability, they will simply relocate their next billion-dollar investment to a neighboring country with a higher WGI score.
And it ties right back to that invented in Hungary goal we talked about earlier, doesn't it? The struggle to generate patents.
It is the absolute linchpin. We talked about how hard it is to move from just assembling parts to inventing the intellectual property. If you want to attract top-tier global research, the brightest scientific minds, and the most risk-tolerant venture capital, you need an institutional environment that is pristine.
Because IP is so fragile.
Intellectual property relies entirely on the rule of law. If you invent a revolutionary new microchip architecture, you need to know the courts will protect your patent. If governance quality slides, the invented in Hungary dream hits a glass ceiling. Talent and innovation will simply flow to environments where the rules are guaranteed.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the skeleton, the nervous system, the lungs, and the brain of this country. We need a final diagnosis. The report provides a brilliant synthesis of this entire journey on page 15, using a classic framework. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Let me summarize the landscape.
Go for it.
For strengths, they have incredibly high human capital, a world-class, exponentially growing digital infrastructure, and a robust, globally integrated export engine.
All very true.
For weaknesses, the natural population decline, that shrinking demographic engine, and the fluctuating governance quality we just analyzed.
The 2 biggest anchors weighing them down.
Yeah, for opportunities, the green energy transition, continuing that remarkable environmental decoupling, and upgrading to pure high-tech manufacturing.
Moving up the value chain.
Exactly. And finally, for threats, the looming heavy social security and healthcare pressure of a deeply aging population and their extreme vulnerability to volatile global demand.
It perfectly encapsulates the situation. Hungary is standing on a tightrope right now. They are transitioning from an efficiency-driven model to an innovation-driven one.
And the stakes are huge.
They have achieved remarkable things. The environmental decoupling and the infant mortality outcomes are genuinely world-class achievements that required immense societal effort. But the sheer, unforgiving demographic math of population contraction means they must rely entirely on digitalization and governance modernization.
They have no margin for error.
None. They don't have the luxury of a booming, youthful population to cover up systemic inefficiencies. Every single worker needs to be leveraged by technology, and every single institution needs to operate with absolute predictability to maintain national competitiveness.
It brings us right back to the medical scan we talked about at the very beginning. The diagnosis isn't a simple binary of healthy or sick. The organism is incredibly strong in its limbs, it has upgraded its nervous system, but it is perhaps stressed in its cellular regeneration and immune system. It's a deeply complex living thing.
That's a great way to put it.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up. As you go about your week, look around at your own country, or your own industry, or even your own company. We are so deeply conditioned to think that limitless physical growth, more people, more factories, more raw materials, is the only possible way forward. We equate physical size with success.
It's the default mindset.
It is. But Hungary's 60-year journey forces us to ask a much harder, much more interesting question. How do you build a richer, greener, more innovative society, even when your population is shrinking?
It's the challenge of the 21st century.
The answer isn't just about having more people. It's about making the systems that connect those people infinitely smarter. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the data. If you want to explore the numbers yourself, the contact information for the report's authors is listed right there in the documentation. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and we'll see you next time.